Pushed into the net by Kylian Mbappe.
Oh, Benyera, beautifully done.
Cornet finds Dembele. The first touch is good. The second is deadly.
Neymar still. Oh my word, what a goal.
Golovin. Lovely finish. Ajax delivery. Guendouzi's header.
Here's an opportunity. Sanchez.
Outrageous goal from Gael Kakuta. Play it again. And Marseille have the points.
Hello everyone and welcome to Le Beau Jeu, the official Ligue 1 Uber Eats English podcast. It's been another massive 2 weeks in the French top flight, and after 7 matches this term, just 2 points cover the top 5, and no, it's not PSG leading the way. In fact, it's all roses for AS Monaco at the top, all doom and gloom for Marseille and Lyon and their new mystères. Sometimes is a good, sometimes, we all know where you're going with that one, Gennaro. Coming up in today's show, we're going to wrap up all the action then from the past fortnight. We're going to travel back to when Lille were top of the pops, not in 2021, but a decade earlier when a certain Eden Hazard led the Dogues to triumph. We'll also take a closer look at what's working on the Côte d'Azur and at OGC Nice, more specifically this season. The derbies, there have been a lot in the last fortnight, and they just keep coming. We're going to look ahead to what it means when northern rivals Lens and Lille lock horns. We'll be previewing the Champions League, the Europa League and Europa Conference League for our Ligue 1 clubs, telling you who has won a Marco Asensio shirt, and to tell you how you can go into the chance to win a Terem Moffi jersey with our Déjà Who quiz. There's all that and more to help me, your host, Robbie Thomson. I'm joined by CBS Viacom's European correspondent and French football specialist, Jonathan Johnson, Le Classique pod's Baptiste, Reynaud, and Ligue 1 commentator and preeminent historian, Andreas Evagora. Gentlemen, this afternoon, this morning, this evening, I'm skipping the hellos. We ran a little bit over last time. I'm trying to shave off a few seconds everywhere I can. So we're going to jump straight into the action, skip the pleasantries, but not the plugs. You can get involved in the conversation on X at Ligue1_ENG. Follow us, like us, subscribe us, talk to your friends about us on all your podcast platforms. And of course, for all the official news coming out of France and all things Ligue 1, Ligue1.com is your first port of call. So, gentlemen, where else to start when wrapping up round 6 and 7 than with Le Classique? It was 2 weeks ago now. Perhaps a lot has happened since then. Certainly, there's been lots of changes at Olympique de Marseille. But, JJ, starting with you to have a look back at this one. We spent a lot of time previewing this massive clash. For you, did it live up to the expectations? Because we saw Paris Saint-Germain really click. It was particularly in the first half a vibrant PSG.
Yeah, absolutely. I think vibrant is a good word for it. It was vibrant sort of before the game, in and around the stadium, and pretty vibrant after it as well. Obviously, a couple of PSG players, went a little bit overboard in terms of their celebrations and find themselves in front of a disciplinary committee. But I'd say it was the first time that we've really seen what we could call a statement performance from a Luis Enrique PSG side, but also the first time that we could really see the extent to which sort of the bridges have been repaired a little bit between sort of PSG's fans and the team. Obviously, following it up with a goalless draw against Clermont the following weekend was not ideal heading into the Champions League, but equally, it shows that it's very much a work in progress, and there were some very big positives to take out of that victory over Marseille. Kylian Mbappe coming off during the first half, and PSG still scoring goals and looking very good in attack, and an excellent appearance from Bradley Barcola as well, who looks like he could really add something to the PSG attack as well. So I think certainly a lot of positives for PSG to take away from that big win over their bitter rivals. But it was a strange build-up to that one, given everything that was happening in Marseille.
That's right. And there has been, the effects of that, Baptiste. What did happen exactly down there in Marseille? Because that's the first thing. What an astonishing series of events. I think over the years in French football, we get accustomed to crazy things happening down in Marseille. But this is just taking it to a whole new level. I don't think anyone saw this coming.
No, I mean, Marseille equals chaos in normal years, but, over the last few weeks, it's been crazy and unusual. It all kick-started from a meeting, I think on the Monday, between Longoria and his team and the various representatives of the supporters groups, at which allegedly, basically the directing team of Marseille was threatened, was told to expect war if they didn't get rid of Marcelino and his staff, and basically that the supporters groups expected better. Marcelino left the club straight after. There were a lot of rumors about Pablo Longoria considering his position. He basically told the owner that he would suspend his activities for a certain amount of time until he got more clarity. And he gave some interviews to La Provence where he was really visibly affected at the pressure he'd been under, which seemed to go beyond the confines of the pitch and the activities at the club. So Marcelino leaves. Longoria decides to stay under pressure from the owner, and apparently under good financial pressure from the owner. And it leads to just a chaotic 2 weeks of Poncho Abaldonado taking the club to the
Poncho,
Classique.
back again.
And then Gennaro Gattuso coming to the club. So, if you wanted to add more fuel to the fire, Gattuso seems like the right person. But it was odd simply because OM had seemed relatively structured under Longoria, despite the changes in managers. There seemed to have been a common thread of him supporting his managers, and he'd finally find one that he truly wanted in Marcelino. And now we're sort of back at square one with a manager who, obviously hasn't picked the players and who doesn't necessarily seems to have been first choice.
It is a crazy, crazy situation. Andreas, just come to you on this one as well. Your feeling now, perhaps we've heard what's happened in the recent past. We heard what happened there. Perhaps let's look forward a little bit, because Gattuso hasn't had the hugest success as a coach yet in his career. We know that Marseille is this volatile footballing environment where sometimes when it all clicks with a passionate coach and the passionate supporters and the hot weather and down on the Vieux-Port and perhaps a little bit of pastis mixed in there as well, that, suddenly, poof, amazing things can happen. What do you see is going to happen down there?
Well, you're right, and they are kind of living life on the edge. But unfortunately, the catalyst for all this, which was the fan group meeting that Baptiste was talking about, with led by Rachid Zeroual, who's quite a famous Marseille fan. Hello, Rachid, if you're listening. That hasn't gone away, and the last coach left because he felt he was being intimidated and was being threatened, which was denied by the fan group. But that means there's a terrible issue of miscommunication. I mean, in any situation when one person feels in that situation, that there is something wrong. But to answer your question, moving forward, I think Gattuso is in a really difficult position because he's got to hit the ground running. He's going to bring in his own tactics. He's got to bring in his own technical staff. And that's the sort of stuff, Robbie, you want to be doing in July and August. You don't want to be doing it in October, because the clock is ticking. Marseille are already in the bottom half. I mean, I know they're not, in terms of points, they're not that far off the top. I think he's got a very tough role because the structure hasn't really changed that much. The players haven't changed that much. I was not that optimistic, to be honest, at the start of the season. I was a bit worried about Aubameyang, who still is not exactly firing on all cylinders. They had a perfect start against Monaco, but their defending was shockingly bad at Monaco. And that's going to be the first job for Gattuso, Robbie.
Well, obviously Gattuso's got a tough task ahead of him, as does any coach. But JJ, if we're talking tough tasks, Fabio Grosso, Gattuso's compatriot, isn't in a field of roses, is he, at the moment? Because look, Lyon are still without a win. I remember saying at the start of the season on the very first podcast, what we're seeing at Lyon at the moment is a little bit like what we've seen with the Saint-Etiennes, the Bordeaux, these big clubs that everyone said can't go down. And I was almost laughed out of my own podcast for suggesting that Lyon could be in relegation trouble. JJ, Lyon have changed coach. Lyon have 5 losses and 2 draws. Lyon scored 1 penalty last month. that's the sum total of everything that they've managed to do. And is Fabio Grosso even the man to try and turn this around? I mean, Lyon are in all sorts of trouble, and that's not without paying credit to Will Still and Reims.
Yeah, absolutely. Not great time for either of the Olympique sides at this moment in time. I will counter your claims and stick up for Baptiste, who I believe said that it could go one of two ways for Lyon. It could go brilliantly or it could go completely disastrously, and obviously it's going towards the latter at the moment. It seems like a game can't go by for Lyon at this moment in time without owner John Textor putting out an official communique about how everything's united behind the scenes, trying to turn around the team's bad form. But it is very worrying. Not on that topic of the only goal scored being a penalty. I think it was Toliso's penalty against PSG. I did see an amusing compilation on X, Twitter, whatever it's called these days, where it was basically Lyon's goal of the month competition, where you had the most beautiful goal, the least beautiful goal, and obviously it was just back-to-back replays of the penalty. But it is hugely worrying. It's a massive challenge for Grosso. We said it at the time that he's going to need the experience that he's had at youth level to try and get the best out of the misfiring products at Lyon, because they're not just the players that have been brought in from sort of outside the OL environment that are underperforming now. It's the kids who've come through the academy as well, and arguably perhaps believe that they've made it before they actually have. And I think sort of interestingly, in the way that I'm saying that Grosso's experience at youth level, certainly with Juventus, might make things a bit easier for him. The fact he was a player at Lyon as well obviously should help in theory, but we debated that last time. Gattuso's experiences coming up to the Marseille job, being in very difficult circumstances, I'm thinking, notably Valencia. He's often worked at clubs where there hasn't been much money to spend, and he's got to make do with what he has in front of him. And I think, both he and Grosso are going to have to be used to doing that, because we know that Lyon have big money issues at the moment as well, big concerns. And yeah, it's not been an ideal start to life for either of them, but certainly a very worrying scenario for Lyon at the moment. And at the end of the day, there are no clubs that are too big to go down. As you pointed out, Saint-Etienne, Bordeaux have shown, to a lesser extent, Nancy as well, another historic French name which fell further down, Sochaux as well. So you do have these clubs that can tumble down the ranks when the rot sets in, and the rot has absolutely set in for Lyon at the moment.
Well, if Lyon are a negative surprise, or perhaps for Baptiste, it could have been negative or positive, of course, I guess. But one surprise that's been a massive positive surprise so far this season, they defeated Lyon 2 weeks ago. They drew with Nice, scoreless, in what was a big match for Nice. There was plenty of pressure on as well, because Nice, it was their 10th anniversary of their stadium. It was a sellout crowd at the Allianz Riviera Stadium, which isn't always the case these days as well. And there was a special context around the match for the Nice squad as well. But Baptiste, we have to talk about Brest. We had an email this week from Afrizal Luckman, who was saying what we've talked about at the start of the season. There always seems to be this surprise club, whether it was Strasbourg or Lens, and every year. And this year, Brest are this side that have jumped out. And I mean, Afrizal said that they were a sort of mid-table side that jumped up and is a big surprise at the start of the season. Brest are even a bigger surprise than that. Brest are not even a solid mid-table side. They're a side that survived the drop last year. And what they're achieving is just incredible. How long can this go on for?
Yeah, $1 million question, and we'll have to see. But it's in the continuity of the end of their season under Eric Roy last year. He came in, steadied the ship, made them harder to beat, and he's kept the same spine to the team. So that's, whether that's down to the fact they have limited financial means or by design, he's got a settled squad, and I think that's what we've seen in the sites that have progressed over the last few years and have had successful seasons compared to their sizes. They've kept with their manager, they've kept with the spine of their team, and they do. Brest do have some good players. Jérémy Le Douaron is very effective in his role. I think Pierre-Lys Melou, previously of Norwich, is actually a very underrated all-action central midfielder. and in Marco Bizot, they've got a good goalkeeper. So again, the there's reliability throughout the spine of the team, and they're well prepared, and they don't operate in chaos like other clubs. And I think you put all of that together, and it's a positive dynamic, which I hope for them will continue to go as the season goes along.
Well, Brest have one defeat so far. They are sitting level on points with Monaco at the top of the standings. The side they drew scoreless with on the weekend, Nice, are one of two sides undefeated. Andreas, we have to talk about Lens, but we're going to do that, and we're going to couch that later on in the podcast regarding a certain match very close to your heart when they take on Arsenal in the Champions League as well. I would like to talk to you about a big 2 weeks for Nantes, and in particular the derby against Rennes on the weekend, because it was a game that they end up losing 3-0. It was 2 late goals, a sending off, a brain fade from Mustafa Mohamed, who completely lost it when his side was still, at 1-1, right in the hunt for the Brittany derby. The week before, a spectacular 5-3 victory for Nantes as well. I mean, not many people were tipping Nantes to be a side, and they're not out of the woods. They're sitting in 13th place, but it's a very respectable 13th place so far from a Nantes side who were undefeated in 4 games before the weekend's loss to Rennes. How have you seen Nantes tracking, and how did you see the derby and a Rennes starting to hit their stride this season, undefeated as they are?
Well, Rennes, I definitely think from an attacking point of view, are one of the most entertaining teams in France. I'm not that surprised they'd be top 5 or top 4 or 5. But getting back to the main part of the question, Nantes, I was actually a bit more optimistic than some of our other podcasts at the start of the season. Remember, they had a terrible season. The second half of the season, they just stayed up Nantes by the skin of their teeth, and they didn't start too well this time. But I do think they've got a few goals in them. And they've kind of got these sort of troopers, more experienced players at the back and in midfield, who I think can just about get them through the season. And it's sort of the opposite of Lyon, if you like, because Lyon don't have those kind of players. I remember Antonetti a few years ago saying that he'd rather have players who've been through a relegation battle, even if they've lost the relegation battle, rather than have players who've never experienced it, because it's such a difficult thing to go through. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Lyon, but they don't have those kind of players. Lyon, the idea of Lyon's players in a relegation struggle is new to them. That's not the case for Nantes. I think last season would have hardened them a bit. They had that awful French Cup final as well, which didn't hope. But I think they've got the players who can just about do it. Simons is a good player for me. You said Mohamedi's starting to score some goals. Quentin Merlin, I think, is a really underestimated player at left back. They're not at the same level as Rennes to me. I think Rennes are always going to be the favourites for that match. But I would be really surprised if Nantes end up going down. I think they'll be just about okay.
One of the other big talking points then out of week 7 was a fantastic goal of the week for Eden Zegrovin for Lille against Le Havre, an absolutely stunning strike. So make sure you catch that one when you get the opportunity, cutting inside on the left foot and putting it in the top corner of the goal. There was another big talking point, and I mentioned it briefly there with OGC Nice and their 22-year-old midfielder, Alexis Becca, who used to play for Caen, came through the ranks at Caen, headed to Lokomotiv Moscow, and late last week, by all accounts, tried to commit suicide, or at least was intending to commit suicide. He was found and talked down from the Magnon Viaduct in Nice. Now, apparently, he has been suffering from depression. The club are across it, and of course, the entire Ligue 1 community came together in support of this young footballer. And I think more than anything, perhaps it was just a reminder to everyone once again that footballers are human beings as well. And yes, they earn a lot of money, and yes, they have superstar status, but footballers have problems like anybody else. Certainly, we all wish Alexis Becca the very best and join the chorus of voices from around the Ligue 1 community as well. And it was just a little reminder of how fragile any human condition can be, and that footballers, even though we like to remove them from a normal normal life ecosystem, if you like. It's not the case. Poor old Alexis Becca, we hope is on the road back to recovery, and we hope that we see him doing what he does best and what he loves best as well, which is playing football very, very soon. Well, there was general surprise at the start of the season when OGC Nice announced that they signed a young Italian coach, Francesco Farioli, to replace interim manager Didier Digga over the summer. Barely known on the coaching scene, and then only as an assistant to De Zerbi, who now finds himself in England with Brighton. Farioli has taken that faith placed in him by OGC Nice and run with it. Jonathan Johnson did a bit of digging to find out more about this young phenomenon of a coach and also what we can expect from Nice this season.
Flying high in the Ligue 1 table early this season are OGC Nice, who underwent a number of changes this past summer after a 9th place finish, which was disappointing by their standards. A goalless draw with Brest means that they remain unbeaten 7 games into the campaign and within a point of top spot. The Eaglets, as they are known, appointed talented young head coach Francesco Farioli to lead the team, and the results so far this term have been impressive. Nice's Italian tactician is just 34, and he's had a fascinating journey to Allianz Riviera, where he's now aiming to lead Ineos's flagship team back into European competition. Farioli actually started out as a goalkeeper at amateur level in his native Italy before ending his playing ambitions to pursue a degree in philosophy in Florence. During his studies, the Tuscan wrote a thesis titled Philosophy of the Game, the Aesthetics of Football and the Role of the Goalkeeper. He would later be picked up by Italian football's prestigious National Training Centre at Coverciano and earned a very young Farioli a near-perfect academic grade of 105 out of 110. The Baga native went into goalkeeper coaching and had a spell with Qatar's youth setup at the Aspire Academy while continuing to publish analytical pieces via his online blog. In 2017, Farioli teamed up with an upcoming Roberto De Zerbi at Benevento and then again at Sassuolo, where the visionary Italian's methods rubbed off on him. De Zerbi developed a reputation during this time which eventually saw him land in the Premier League with Brighton and Hove Albion via Shakhtar Donetsk. Farioli took a different route into Europe's top 5 leagues with a stint as assistant coach in Turkey with Alanyaspor before making history at the age of just 31. Fellow Turkish Super League side Fatih Karagümrük appointed the Italian as the youngest head coach in Europe at the time. That spell was enough to convince Alanyaspor to bring Farioli back, but this time for the top job, which he did for 18 months before being offered the Nice gig. Arnaud Lusamba, who played for Nice before moving to Turkey, recently told French publication SoFoot that studying De Zerbi's Brighton tactics formed part of Farioli's methodology. Now in France, the philosophy graduate has set about instilling a new philosophy in his players on the French Riviera. Farioli is enjoying early success with a talented group of players younger than himself, yet captained by a player 5 years older than him, Brazilian veteran Danche. Jean-Claire Todibo, famed for his 9-second red card and just 23, yet has already played for Barcelona, Benfica and Schalke since leaving formative club Toulouse, and he's now a full France international. Khephren Thuram, one of Lilian's 2 Italy-born footballing sons, is just 22 and already boasts over 100 appearances for Nice, having swapped from Côte d'Azur rivals Monaco like teammate Sofiane Diop. Terem Moffi, prolific with Lorient and now Nice, is just 24 and one of a number of talented Nigerian attackers in Europe right now, having broken through in Belgium after flying under the radar in Lithuania. Yusuf Ndiashimi, like Farioli, emerged in Turkey with Malatyaspor and Basaksehir, and now with Nice, the 24-year-old Burundi international is versatile across midfield and defence. Poland under-21 international and penalty hero Marcin Bulka dislodged Kasper Schmeichel as starting goalkeeper. The ex-PSG and Chelsea man had spent time on loan at Cartagena and Châteauroux before joining Nice. And they're just some of the main stars of Nice's early season form, but Farioli's impact has been clear on this team even just weeks into the season, considering that all of those players were present last campaign. Settled into a rough 4-3-3 formation, Nice earned back-to-back wins away at PSG and Monaco, who are also in Ligue 1's early top 4, as well as a home win over Strasbourg, who are also in the top 6. The goals that were missing from the 3 opening draws appeared with 6 across those 3 impressive wins, with Farioli grateful to his players for being attentive to his demands. It's what I've been asking of them from the outset, said the Italian recently, to pay attention to the small details. We have improved in a lot of certain areas of play, but we also have room for improvement in quite a few ways, such as finding solutions in a more fluid and dynamic way. Nice's fans, who greeted their team at 4:30 a.m. after the win in Paris, are certainly starting to enjoy life under Farioli's leadership and can finally dream of their first silverware since the 1997 Coupe de France.
Andreas, Nice undefeated after 7 games this season. It has been a remarkable start for Farioli. And probably, I mean, not a surprise insofar as we know how ambitious the Ineos project is, and there have been changes behind the scenes at the club as well as on the football pitch. How good are Nice this season? How far can they go?
I've been very impressed with Nice this season. Defensively, I think they've only conceded 4 goals so far. So that part of the pitch, they're doing really well. They were superb against PSG a couple of weeks back. And from a tactical point of view, what was interesting about Jonathan's report, Farioli, of course he's young, what is he, 34? I've heard some older coaches say that can be an advantage because, it's easier for people to communicate with people of their own age and their own generation. And older coaches have said that they've had to change their messaging to younger players to make things shorter, more concise, more exciting in a way, because that's the kind of way younger players that's what they'll respond to. And secondly,
140 characters.
Yeah, well, not quite that. But the other thing is, what coach is saying, maybe this is just older coaches saying that younger players hold coaches in slightly less esteem than they might have 20 years ago. So, oh, there's this coach, he knows everything. Younger players, they want to learn. This is what they're saying, but they want different kind of messages, and they want maybe a different kind of way of being stimulated. So that might work for Farioli. He's of that generation, and he knows it. I really do like the way Nice playing. Another player who's goes a bit under the radar, Melvin Bard. I think he's a super left back. He's only 22, 23, and doesn't make any headlines, but I think he's a really solid player. We talked last time about Moffi, how dangerous he is, and the other players that was talked about in that report by Jonathan. So I can certainly see Nice being top 4, top 5, and Farioli's done superbly well. I don't really see any weaknesses so far. And let's see how things kick on between now and the end of the year. But, top marks for Farioli so far.
Baptiste, do you agree with what Andreas has said? And yes, a young coach, and Will Still obviously was amazing. Didier Digard at Nice as well before, who perhaps after a generation communication problem with Christophe Galtier the season before that with a few of the players at Nice, or midway through that season, let's not forget, with Didier Digard. But what is this young generation of coaches coming through? And then I won't ask you how to explain Eric Roy at Brest and what he's doing, which is just kicking against the theme. But can this Nice side be a top 5 finisher in European football next season?
They've certainly been very impressive, and what I like with Farioli is there's a clear structure to his team. They're well organized, but also there's real ambition. And I think the criticism aimed at Nice last year was that they were stale going forward, despite the fact they had Moffi, they had one of the most underrated strikers in Gaëtan Laborde, I think. So they've added a bit of pace with Boga as well up top, and just a bit of ambition. And I think they've put in a nice mix of experienced players and young, hungry players. So you see Morgan Sanson coming to the club is an example of somebody who knows Ligue 1 and is quite versatile. But he's right next to Kefren Thuram, who's up and coming, and the impressive Diayashime in centre midfield. And similarly in defence with obviously Dante, who's ever young, and Todibo. So they've brought in a nice mix. I'm a bit concerned in terms of their depth, especially defensively. And Todibo's been impressive, but if you lose Dante, and he's bound to slow down at some point, that would be a big miss, and just broad depth throughout the squad. But certainly their starting 11 has clicked very well, and why not aim for a top 6? I think there's definitely space for it. And I think this is a theme that we're seeing, whether it's Still or even Roy, who's a bit older, obviously as a manager, a bit more experienced. But I can't help but be impressed by how disciplined those sides are in a fluid, tactical way. There's a template there that they're trying to follow when they come into the game, but they're also flexible and they have that nice mix of youth and experience. So impressive starts from all those clubs so far.
I bet all those Nice fans listening to this podcast are holding their breath that Donch doesn't suffer that similar injury to, what was it, 2 seasons ago? And it was such a massive blow to that Nice side. Exactly what you're talking about. Here we are. He's 2 years older. We're 2 years further on, and possibly a similar situation. JJ, very quickly, can Nice, off the back of your report and your investigation into the club and how it's going, are they realistic top 5 finishers? Are we going to see Ineos finally regularly back in European competition after getting a taste for it last year?
Yeah, it would be nice to think that they are. I mean, the one thing that I would say is I don't think that much has changed at Nice, really. I mean, you look at the members of the starting 11, and it's largely the team, that was on the field last season. It was just consistency was a massive issue, and I completely agree with Baptiste in terms of the squad depth. I just don't think that depth is necessarily as important when you're not competing in Europe. So that could work to Nice's advantage. But I do think in terms of the quality on the pitch, the fact that they've managed to keep Todibo, Thuram, I think those are 2 big pluses. Obviously, Moffi, we got a taste of what he might offer Nice over the second half of last season, and he sort of hit the ground running again this campaign. And they do have some sort of underrated pieces who can chip in from time to time as well. The former Monaco man, Sofiane Diop, has moments of real quality as well. So I certainly think that Nice have the ability to get themselves back into Europe, and it would be nice to think that that would be enough for Ineos as well, despite their regular flirtations with going and acquiring whichever Premier League club might be on the market this week. But also, I just wanted to weigh in quickly on something related to Brest and Eric Roy. I remember a couple of years ago, I can't remember if it was last season or the season before, but it was under Michel Dezacarian, where Brest had these crazy runs of either consecutive defeats or consecutive victories. I remember them going about 6 games on the bounce, and when they suddenly lifted themselves up from the bottom of the table to near the top. And I think, again, it comes back to this sort of issue of consistency. There are some teams, I mean, generally speaking, across Ligue 1, most squads have some very, very good base players, and some decent talents. That's why it's the League of Talents after all. But I think when you have somebody with the experience that Eric Roy brings, perhaps less hot-headed than Michel Dezacarian can be at times, or maybe less abrupt, I think that has managed to sort of galvanize what is actually quite a solid, core in that Brest team, despite losing some good players like Honorat, Fèvre as well. And that's why I think we're seeing now this quality from Brest. I don't think it'll necessarily last all season long, but I just record when we were sort of talking about them, they had these crazy runs at times of like 6 games on the bounce with wins. So very, very curious to see if both Nice and Brest can keep up the pace. But if I had to put my money on one of the two, it would certainly be with Farioli and Nice.
You're listening to Jonathan Johnson, Baptiste, Reynaud, Andreas Evagora, and myself, Robbie Thomson, your one-stop shop for all things French football, Le Beau Jeu, the official Ligue 1 Uber Eats podcast. Well, it's time now for our latest installment of Ligue 1 Legends with Professor Andreas Evagora, who today is going to take us back to when Rudi Garcia. Now, there's a name not often associated with unmitigated success in the French game. He's something of a controversial figure these days, Rudi Garcia. But a decade ago, more now, with a certain Lille side, he swept all before them, going all the way to the title with a swashbuckling, free-scoring, absolutely free brand of attacking football. And Andreas is going to tell us where all of that began.
Spring 1996, a chilly afternoon at the Avenue du Stade in rural Belgium. Little normally disturbs the tranquility of Braine-le-Comte, but today Pascal Delmoitiez is furious. He's looking at the new pitch laid down for the town's football team, Stade Brennois. It's smooth and pristine, but suddenly there's an unwanted intruder on the turf. Delmoitiez, who's the club manager, curses to himself as he sees a small boy kicking a ball at the penalty area. That kid will ruin the grass before next week's match, he thinks to himself. He storms across the pitch to give the boy a piece of his mind. But as he approaches the penalty area, Delmoitiez stops. He can't believe what he's seeing. The boy can't be more than 5 years old, and he's striking the ball with the power and accuracy of a player 3 times his age, time after time, and he's doing it in bare feet. Delmoitiez asks himself, who on earth is this kid? The frightened boy sees the manager approach, grabs the ball, leaps over a fence and into a house just a few metres away. Delmoitiez has forgotten all about the state of the pitch. He follows the boy and rings the front doorbell. A surprised Thierry Hazard opens the door, shakes the hand of Delmoitiez, then turns around to his son. Eden, there's a man here who wants to talk to you. 11 years later, 2007, Delmoitiez had no trouble persuading the young Eden to play for Stade Brennois. Now, after a couple of years at regional club Tubize, Hazard is wanted around Europe. At 16, Hazard already has everything. 2-footed, brilliant control, passing, pace, dribbling ability, and that powerful shot developed on the pitches of Braine-le-Comte. Lille aren't the favourites to sign Hazard, but they do have an ace up their sleeve. The club is little more than 1 hour's drive from the Hazard family home in French-speaking Braine-le-Comte, and it helps that Hazard is a Ligue 1 fan and hero worships Zinedine Zidane. Lille's academy director, Jean-Michel Van Damme, drives to Belgium. He persuades the Hazard that the young Eden will easily settle at Lille and have the chance to play with the pros. The Hazard family agree, and Lille pull off one of the transfer coups of the century, one that will steer them to a first league title in 57 years. 3 years later, July 2010, Lille club owner Michel Seydoux, who is a famed film producer, has big plans for the so-called Dogues. He knows the Northeast is a football-mad region, but Lille's heyday was in the post-war period when they were twice French champions and won the cup 5 times. Seydoux is planning a new stadium to replace the 19,000 Stade Lille Métropole, and the club have bought cheaply but wisely. Fans are warming to coach Rudi Garcia, whose attacking team has finished 5th and 4th in the last 2 seasons. Seydoux's aim for the new season is to stay in the top 5. He's rejected a €12 million offer for Hazard from Turkish giants Fenerbahce, and transfer requests from Gervinho, who's courted by Liverpool, defender Adil Rami, and midfielder Yohan Cabaye. But that means finances are tight. The only permanent arrival is misfiring forward Moussa Sow on a free transfer from Rennes. Some fans doubt Sow will be the man to make an impact. After all, he's only scored 3 goals in the previous season. Hazard is another matter. Though predecessor Claude Puel hesitated to play the precocious youngster, Garcia knows the Belgian is capable of greatness. Hazard debuted for Lille at 16 and a year later became the youngest ever scorer for the club. Garcia is keen to shield Hazard and his team. At a July 2010 press conference, he insists that competing with the 3 favourites in Ligue 1 is unrealistic. If we come 4th again, that'll be a good season, he tells reporters. Hazard is asked about the campaign ahead. Yes, Marseille, Bordeaux and Lyon are the favourites, but why not try to finish above all 3? The 21st of November 2010, Stade Lille Métropole. After a poor October that leaves Lille down in 8th, Les Dogues are top of the league for the first time in 5 years after a 2-1 win against Monaco. Hazard is unplayable, skipping past opponents with ease and setting up goals for Ludovic Braniac and Pierre-Alain Frot. November 2010 would be a vital month. 2 weeks later, Lille hosts Lorient. A massive dump of snow delays the game for 24 hours, but fans who do brave freezing temperatures are rewarded with a classic. A crazy game, a real battle on a pitch that deteriorated in the second half. Gervinho has one of his greatest games in a Lille shirt. So scores a hat-trick, already his 2nd of the season. Lille are on a roll. They win 6-3. At Christmas, it could hardly be closer. Lille a point clear of PSG, Rennes and Lyon, with Marseille 2 further back. For Hazard and co, there's all to play for. In early 2011, Garcia turned Lille into a winning machine. His key players are consistent and injury-free. During that memorable season, 3 featured in every league game. Hazard, keeper Michael Landreau, and the midfield dynamo and captain Rio Mavuba. a player who overcame childhood tragedy and trauma to reach the top. Remy, Cabaye, So, Gervinho and Mathieu Debuchy all missed just 3 league games or fewer that season. So stunned France with an outstanding campaign in front of goal. The Paris-born Senegal international banged in 25 league goals, the highest total in 7 seasons. That season, everything clicked. So's haul was more than his 4 other seasons in Ligue 1 combined, a goal every 111 minutes. Ivorian winger Gervinho also had the season of his life with 15 vital goals. After winning 5 matches out of 6, Lille travelled to PSG on the 21st of May, knowing the title was theirs for the taking. On a famous night for Les Dogues, a stunning strike from Bragnac put Garcia's men on their way. PSG striker Guillaume Warraud equalised just before the break, but then got sent off. So put Lille back ahead, and though PSG grabbed a late equaliser, a point enough to see Lille champions for the first time in 57 years. Lille would win the league by a big 8-point margin, and that wasn't all. Les Dogues also beat PSG in the French Cup final to land the double. That successful campaign a reward for several years of good planning and smart transfers. Hazard, who would stay in the north of France for 1 more season, the X-factor who turned Lille from contenders to champions. If there's one moment that sums up Hazard's impact, it's his goal at Marseille in March. Collecting the ball with his back to goal, the Belgian spins and slams the ball past Steve Mandanda from 35 metres. A breathtaking goal, and that strike was recently voted Lille's goal of the century by fans. A super shot with power, accuracy and verve. A shot honed 15 years earlier on the unsung pitches of small-town Belgium.
Well, I certainly remember perhaps the biggest thing about this season for me was Moussa Sow just being in such irrepressible form from a player, as Andreas said, scored more goals than he scored in his 4 previous seasons. And always such a talented player. And I think Gervinho was a talented player. Eden Hazard was a talented player. Adil Rami certainly was a talented footballer as well. And there was something in this Rudi Garcia way of coaching that we've seen in glimpses since then, 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, but that all these talented players were able to express themselves to the very best of their ability. And obviously it sounds simple when you say it like that of course you need that to win, but that's when real magic can happen. Baptiste, what do you remember about this Lille side that won the double, actually? I remember them beating Paris Saint-Germain in the final of the Cup as well with a Ludo Bragnac free kick that caught out Gregory Coupe at the Stade de France.
I just remember them as being a young, unassuming, quite humble side that just got there faster than planned, in a way. I mean, Rudi Garcia had done really well at Le Mans, I think, getting his teams to play attractive football despite, limited financial power, and they had to be creative. And he applied the same method to Lille, into a club that had taken all the right steps to get there effectively in the way they planned under Claude Puel, developing the Luchin Center, getting ready to develop the stadium. They'd been sensible. They'd been planning for the long term, and that paid off. And I just want to say, I lived in Lille 2 years before that season for a year, and remember seeing, a 16, 17-year-old Eden Hazard play, and that was, you could tell straight away just by how bright he was on the ball, how brave he was on the ball, just how exciting a player he was. And the fact that they kept him, they convinced him to come, and they got him to play a lot with other players that had come through the ranks, like Debuchy and Yohan Cabaye. I thought that it was just it was a beautiful recipe. It was difficult not to like them as title winners that year.
Was that a university year for you in Lille back then, Baptiste?
That's right. Technically my Erasmus year, despite being a French citizen. So,
JJ, what about you? What are your memories of this Lille side back in 2011?
Yeah, pretty similar to Baptiste. I mean, I think the one thing that I would add is there were some really underrated, important elements in that side as well, although it was generally a young one. I remember Michael Landreau being really crucial, like his experience at that point of his career, and I think he was even player of the month at one point towards the end of that season when some of his performances really helped to make a difference for Lille. And I'm glad that Baptiste mentioned sort of the work done under Claude Puel as well, because I remember actually seeing Aston Villa against Lille in the old Intertoto Cup, sort of at the beginning of when Lille was starting to become a bit of a force. Very tricky teams to come up against even then. So it wasn't a surprise to sort of see them, solidify that kind of reputation and build on it with some of those players that came through the youth academy. So, very sort of right at the beginning of my term, pretty much just when I decided to come back to France and sort of cover what was going on in Ligue 1 and everything that was about to happen with the PSG project. So, a lot of nostalgia for that period of French football as well. And, they were just one of those teams where, I think you guys hit the nail on the head, where everything just seemed to click at the right time. You had that right amount of experience, but the right amount of youth as well. The blend was almost perfect. And obviously we've seen in years gone, more recent years, that it's been harder for Lille to recreate that. I know they won the title in 2021, but, you look at everything that happened, especially the ill-fated Marcelo Bielsa stint, and it all could have come crumbling down, and Lille could have been one of those clubs that we were talking about dwelling in Ligue 2. If Christophe Galtier had not come in and rescued them from their relegation battle.
Andreas, just quickly, after you've been thrilling us every episode this season with taking us back down memory lane to this period, and this period in particular was such an amazing time for French football. I mean, obviously, we look back with nostalgia now, and you look at the names of the players that made it and the names of the players that were big. A player like Eden Hazard, who was just such a remarkable footballer, a real rare talent, but what he went on to achieve with Belgium as well. But this period from sort of Lyon in 2008, Bordeaux, Marseille, Lille, Montpellier, Paris Saint-Germain, over this period, every year was a new champion in French football. Did it need to be something like that? There's no one giant juggernaut of a club to allow something like Lille to happen, a Lille side that hadn't won the league for 50 years to happen. And can it happen again? Can we have another period like that where anyone can really win Ligue 1?
Well, Ligue 1, you've got to look at it in the same context as other big leagues in Europe. When money is concentrated into 2 or 3 or even one club, it's very hard for anyone to break through. And that was a period between about, let's say, pre-QSI, that the clubs were relatively balanced in terms of their resources. I think at that stage, Lyon had the biggest budget, but you're not talking about huge gaps as there are now between PSG and the rest, and sort of the second tier and then the second tier, and then the likes of Brest, for instance, who are way back in terms of finances. There was some great French players, the generation, that generation born, of about 1990, late 80s coming through. I think it was a very interesting time for Ligue 1. We had, as I think Baptiste just says on the chat, 5 different winners in 5 different years. I find that very difficult to see that happening in Ligue 1 or any big league, because the titles attract the money attracts the players, and it's this sort of vicious circle, if you want to call it that, to put it in a negative way. So I don't think we'll see that in France or really in any other league where you get 5 different winners in 5 years. And Lille, they lost. I don't think they were ever going to keep a generational talent in Eden Hazard, but even the other players we talked about, most of them left fairly quickly, didn't they? And Lille were kind of not even top 2, top 3 within a few years.
And so did the coach, Rudi Garcia, as well. And that he left he left a club that wasn't ready to go on with it either. I mean, it's never easy when you lose so many quality players, but it's been a criticism of Rudi Garcia leveled at him since then at clubs that he's left as well. Join in the conversation at Ligue1_ENG for English on Twitter/X. And of course, like and subscribe to the podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. Well, it's time for our third feature in today's episode now with our undercover French Englishman. So very well spoken, certainly better spoken English than myself, Baptiste Reynaud. And this afternoon, this evening, this morning, depending on where you are and where you're listening from, he's taking a look at another huge match on the French Ligue 1 calendar. We've been deprived of it over the last, well, probably in the 21st century more often than not. But this is a huge clash that developed at the back end of the last century, and we've had some big clashes over the years. Now that they're both back in the top flight and looking to do well, two ambitious clubs, it's back to that passionate affair it always has been. I am, of course, talking about the Derby du Nord, Lille versus Lens. It's coming up in round 8, and Baptiste has more on the match that stops the north of France.
The Derby du Nord between the sire of the Racing Club de Lens and the Dogues of Lille is a truly regional derby rather than national rivalry. Only 36 kilometers separates the two towns, and both teams have rarely been near the top of the table at the same time or have truly been in the French people's imaginations as compared to the likes of Marseille, Saint-Etienne, Lyon or PSG, which form some of the biggest rivalries in the country. Traditionally, Lens have always been seen as the more working class team with real grassroots and a public representative of the whole region, whilst Lille has always been seen as more bourgeois due to its status as the main big city of the north. Lens remains, even to this day, rather underappreciated as a town. It's a small town, about 32,000 in the city itself, whilst Lille is much bigger with about 250,000 people and attracts more investment. And thanks to Eurostar, has been a lot more visible with its links to the UK and Belgium and its status as a big university town. But despite that rivalry, and no matter what the local fans might say, there's actually a lot more that unites those two clubs than actually divides them. So first, the fact that the Nord, the region they're in, and the Ch'tis, the local people with the Picardy language, have traditionally been derided by the rest of the France because of their status as mining country, which will be, which people will probably see close links to certain areas of the UK, actually. Before the arrival of the Eurostar and a famous film in France called Bienvenue chez les Ch'tis, which portrayed the Ch'tis as they are loving, welcoming people, the Nord was always seen as slightly backwards, uneducated, and not worth its time. That obviously has changed since, and the fact that they have now two thriving clubs is a huge boost to the region and a huge boost to both clubs. Secondly, the two clubs have had their ups and downs over the years. Lens spent most of the 2010s in Ligue 2 and financial disarray. And whilst Lille have spent the last 20 years in Ligue 1, they have also had a few brushes with relegation and difficult financial times. Having said that, what is great at the moment about the derby is that both clubs are finally back into the ascendancy at the same time. Lille were obviously champions a couple of years ago under Christophe Galtier, and after a difficult season, they seem to be back with Paulo Fonseca at the helm since the start of last year, playing exciting football. And obviously Lens, since their return to Ligue 1, have been nothing short of sensational, finishing second last year, playing attractive football, and being back in the Champions League. But having said that, it's uncertain times at the moment at the start of the season for both Lens and Lille. Lens have suffered a number of defeats and recorded their first win only on match day 6 after worrying 3-0 defeats versus Monaco and 1 against Lens, conceding too many goals as well against the likes of PSG when that was the bedrock of their squad and their success last season. For Lille, it feels a bit as though they've stagnated. They suffered a heavy defeat away to Lorient, and they recently lost their long-term invincibility at home to Reims, who are themselves very much a thriving team. Whilst they've been unconvincing in their wins and draws, and there have been a lot of rumours about Paulo Fonseca, one of their real assets, being really dissatisfied at the club for various reasons. So there's a lot to look forward to in this derby. One which is, obviously, as I said, a regional derby, and for which fans have tended to be close and good-hearted rather than tribal and antagonistic. It's a good-hearted derby that will see a lot of interesting players coming through this year and experiencing their first Derby du Nord. So the likes of Lenny Yoro, who is a 17-year-old centre-back, really promising for Lille and starting to make headways into the team, is one to look out for. And obviously for Lens, who seem to be gaining form a little bit. We'll look out for Eli Wahi, whose signing at the summer was a real statement of intent. Probably the biggest statement of intent from a French club over the last few years as they head into the Champions League and try to regain their form. On top of that, two great up-and-coming managers, Franquez and Paulo Fonseca, both want their teams to play positive football, are tactically flexible, and have had a lot of success trying to bring through players and devise a real system and a real identity to their sides. So one of the most passionate derbies, one of the friendliest derbies, probably, if you're coming as a neutral, and certainly one to be excited about.
JJ, we often bemoan the fact that in France we don't have this notion, or an English notion of a derby, or perhaps a Buenos Aires notion of a derby, where I think you've got 20 professional football clubs in one city. In France, it's generally one club per city. This is a classic example. I think Baptiste said it at the start of his report there, that it's just a number of kilometers that separate Lens and Lille. Is this as close to a derby as you can get, a real one in France? I mean, there's Saint-Etienne, there's and Lyon, there's Nice, Monaco, there's Toulouse, Bordeaux. But again, we're talking more and more kilometers. And it's the same story here in the north. But why are these considered derbies then? Is it because the regions are so strong, the identity is so strong? If they're not cross-town rivals, they're cross-region, cross-department rivals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you still have that rivalry. In fact, it's interesting. We touched on Nantes earlier, but it was sort of a similar story with Nant and Ren, and you had Mathis Ablin who sort of crossed the divide just for a loan spell with Nantes, and then you have the passionate Ren fans holding up the banner saying it's basically a one-way ticket out of the club. There won't be any sort of return after his loan spell, which perhaps was going a little overboard, but also at the same time, it speaks to the passion that some of these fixtures can generate. And obviously, we've gone into depth many a time on this podcast about how frustrating it is to not be able to have the color and atmosphere that away fans can bring to some of these big games. I think that away fans have been banned for this one again, but I think what really helps to make this one feel like a real true derby, sort of, especially in the sense of sort of like comparing it to English football derbies, is the atmosphere that gets generated, especially when you play at Lens, which is a very English style stadium with, arguably one of the best, if not the best, atmosphere in France, certainly when it comes to, to one of these big games. And it's one of those matches that I think took on importance as well over a number of years when Lens, were representing French football on the continental stage. Lille were really coming into their own as well and becoming a bit of a domestic force. And it's two passionate sets of fans, and it always, provides, maximum entertainment, and quite often, a nice little bit of needle as well, which, I feel like, French football almost needs a bit more of, not less, in terms of how these games are policed.
Andreas, where would you classify the Derby du Nord in the ranking of French derbies and French rivalries? I mean, it's a pretty passionate one. We have seen some scenes in the last few years of the fans taking it perhaps beyond the limits necessarily. But I mean, I like JJ. I love there being a little bit of needle. I love the fact that the home fan or the away fans are there at the training ground when the bus leaves to travel to the game with the flares, and on the overpasses as the away teams arriving in the next stadium, there are all the signs. This is not going to go well for you, if I can put that very politely. We do not wish you the very best of luck today. Those sort of messages that are written in more colloquial, colourful French. But Andreas, where do you rank this one?
Oh, I think it's high because as a region, I think it's one of the real hotbeds of France. I mean, obviously, a place like, there are cities where football is has a hugely passionate following, but I spent a bit of time up there, and really, for me, that part of France is all kind of really football crazy. We should say a lot of players do come from that part of the world. If you look at French internationals, a lot of top players come from that part of the world. And it is just a part of the world where they love their football. Cynics might say it's not the most beautiful part of France, but I would disagree with that. There's a lot of nice parts of France up there. And without getting too deeply into it, this idea of the regional identity and regions asserting themselves, it's very important. It's one of the big issues in France at the moment, Robbie, because France is a very centralized country. And at the moment, there's a big debate in French politics about regional identities and cultures being recognized more. So that might have something to do with it. But I do think it's a hotbed of French football in terms of geography. It is the closest. In France, people do sort of call everything a derby. I've heard Lyon against Marseille called a derby, and it's just a language thing. Whereas from those from an English point of view, it is a derby of a specific place. It's a big derby, and for once, both teams are doing fairly well. So it's really one to look forward to.
All right, let's keep moving on. Unless Baptiste, do you have anything more to add to what we can expect from the Derby du Nord in a week's time?
As just echoing what people have said, just a really passionate derby, but also one that I think really reflects the values of the region. The people are very humble there. They really support their football club because it means a lot to them. It's very close to their heart. Whilst in other regions, it's more around hot-headedness, I would put it. In certainly in the south, if you were to jump into maybe French cliches, but it's this is as close as you're going to get to a British derby, I think. In Ligue 1, around the south, it would be more Italian style of attitude, I would say, in the stands, and Brittany has its own culture as well, but is it doesn't have that same closeness and proximity with Lille as the Derby du Nord has. So it's certainly a very unique one and a very exciting one, and I'm glad both teams are doing well at the same time, because it's also a region that needs a lot of spotlight on it and deserves more spotlight on it.
It's the beer derby of France. That's basically what you're saying. You can have all different regions and cider in the west and down south, maybe a bit of Campari or all your aperitifs, but the Derby du Nord is the beer derby of France. And I agree with you, Baptiste, if that is indeed what you were trying to say, because I think it is as well. You're listening to Baptiste, Reynaud, and Jonathan Johnson and Andreas Evagora talking all things French football. Time to move on, because we've got a big week of continental football coming up. And this is the moment I was alluding to earlier, because Lens take on Arsenal in the Champions League this week. It's a fixture very close to the heart of our very own Andreas Evagora, who remembers very well a Lens side getting up by 1-0 back in 1998 as French champions. I think the return fixture was a 1-1 draw as well in the north of France. Andreas, that's the history between these two sides. But after Arsenal swept aside PSV 4-0 in their opening match, Lens came from behind to draw 1-1 with Seville, a Fulgini free kick in Group B. Can Lens really mix it with the Gunners this week?
I'm reaching back into my memory. I did actually go to I'm showing my age, that Lens Arsenal match. I was a mere youngster, of course, in 98, but it was 1-1, and Lens got a late equaliser, as I remember, and then became the first team to win at Wembley, the first French team to win at Wembley. They beat Arsenal because Arsenal were playing at Wembley back then. To the present, Lens have picked up, which is good for them. That match was a 1-1. I wouldn't be that surprised if it's another 1-1 next week. Arsenal away defensively are very strong. They've played 6 hours of football away from North London without conceding a goal. They are a little bit vulnerable to a direct, diagonal, quick ball, which might open things up for Sotaka. Maybe Eli Wahi might have a good night. I think it'll be fairly close. There'll be a very good atmosphere there, and Lens will certainly go into that match much more confident than they were a couple of weeks ago. Though we should say, I think they played well at Sevilla. That was a really good performance for them to get a 1-1 draw. So I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a fairly close group, and I won't be surprised if it's another 1-1 draw.
Well, they are coming off back-to-back wins, their first wins of the season as well for Lens after those wins over Toulouse and Strasbourg in the league. JJ, PSG are on the road to Newcastle. Massive clash of modern football, if you like. PSG, who are still stuttering a little bit. There are rumours out at the moment about Kylian Mbappe suggesting that he's not 100% fit because of all his do I stay, do I go pre-season and a lack of going on the pre-season tour with the team, of not doing enough to be, or not being with the first team squad for pre-season training. Against Clermont, I mean, and again, I used to defend PSG for this all the time. I mean, it was scoreless, but PSG could easily have won 4-0 as well. There were some fantastic saves, some profligate finishing. I don't think it was a concerning result so much for PSG, but Newcastle will be a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to point out as well that PSG once again coming up against one of their own products who kept them out on the day at Clermont with Maury Dior, the Clermont goalkeeper. It's a recurring theme for PSG, but I don't think we should read too much sort of into the goalless draw. I mean, we know that PSG are a work in progress under Luis Enrique. They do obviously need to work on their finishing a little bit, and I was surprised that Gonzalo Ramos didn't get the nod to start in Clermont. Equally surprised that Kylian Mbappe was sort of risked, so to speak, in that game, given that he picked up an ankle injury in Le Classique against Marseille. But also at the same time, I mean, Luis Enrique wants to put his strongest team out wherever possible, in order to try and build up this cohesion. And Newcastle away is going to be a big test of it, because we've been talking about what constitutes a rivalry, a derby in a domestic sense in France. I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a state-owned rivalry between a club that enjoys Saudi backing in Newcastle and a Qatari-owned club in PSG. So this is one where the narrative is almost going to overshadow anything that happens on the field. But in terms of PSG delivering a performance, I think we've already seen from some of the games this season that when it's the bigger teams that they're coming up against, with all due respect to the likes of Clermont, when they're coming up against the likes of Lens, Lyon, Marseille, they really can turn it on. And, I think that PSG will put in a strong performance in Newcastle.
That's Ligue 1's 2 Champions League participants this season. Moving on to the Europa League, Baptiste, Rennes, 3-1 winners over Nantes, 3-0 winners over Maccabi Haifa in their first game in a group that also includes Panathinaikos, the Greek side, and Villarreal, their opponents this week in Group F. Villarreal lost their opening game to Panathinaikos as well. A win here for Rennes would be a huge step to going through to the next round. Not only France need it, Rennes need it as well, because Rennes are an ambitious club that have been knocking on sort of the European door for a while without ever living up. Or they need that result. They need that campaign that puts them on the map, don't they?
Very much so. They've been in Europe the last few seasons, and they've assembled a squad that has depth and that has a lot of talent going forward. I think, as you said, they're an ambitious club. They want to make their mark on the European stage. And when I look at that group and their performance in the first game, I think there's definitely space for them to do so and to impose themselves on the group. I mean, this isn't a Villarreal that we've known necessarily over the last few years. I think it's been a bit more chaotic for them this season. And whilst Panathinaikos were impressive in beating Marseille on the Champions League qualifications that they didn't reach in the end, that was as much to do with Marseille's shortcomings as Panathinaikos, successful endeavors. So I don't think they'll be looking at that group, feeling like the underdog. And I think it's the perfect opportunity to make a statement. And I think, away at Villarreal is one place to do so. And I'm quietly confident for them.
Staying in the Europa League, JJ, in Group B, we saw Pancho Bardonado's Marseille turn on the style against Ajax. It was a remarkable match of football, finished 3-3 in the end in their opening game. It's going to be another tough clash for them. We've spoken about Marseille. We've spoken about Gennaro Gattuso, their new coach. What can we expect from them against Brighton? I mean, it's early days in the Gattuso coaching reign, but can we honestly expect them? I mean, Brighton have had up and down results in the last few days as well. What do we expect from this?
Yeah, really fascinating, this one. Obviously a battle between two Italian managers. I was delighted over the weekend, obviously, with my beloved Aston Villa winning 6-1 against Brighton at home. I don't expect Marseille to repeat the feat, but I think Marseille should be looking at this at the moment, looking, to hopefully pounce on a vulnerable Brighton side. I think they've lost back-to-back games because they lost in the EFL Cup as well. So there's no better time to come up against the Seagulls at this moment in time, and it's also possibly a good moment for Gattuso to really sample, the atmosphere of Stade Vélodrome on a European night, which I think is going to factor into how his spell in charge of the team goes. Obviously not an easy task, and Brighton will want to bounce back. But Marseille, I think, will really fancy their chances after an unexpectedly prolific outing against Ajax. Although if you look at sort of the demise of Ajax over the last 12 months or so, maybe it wasn't too surprising. And actually, I think this is an underrated subplot in all of the French team's involvement in Europe at the moment. You've got this battle between the French sides and the Dutch sides, and obviously that factors into Arsenal playing against Lens this week as well. So it's certainly going to be fascinating to see how Marseille's Europa League outing goes, because really, certainly in terms of the coefficient, we could really do with Marseille picking up some points for the French clubs.
Andreas, in France's and Ligue 1's final Europa League participant, Toulouse, they're taking on Austrian side LOSC. They drew 1-1 with Union Saint-Gilloise in their opening match. Liverpool are the big side in this group. Is everyone else playing for second place? And Toulouse, how have you seen them travelling? They got a good win on the weekend as well, 3-0 over Metz. So that was a fantastic result for this young Toulouse side and their eclectic bunch of nationalities.
Yeah, that was the perfect way to go into this Europa League match. That win against Metz. I think, Liverpool are gonna go through. No disrespect to the others, but Toulouse, they were a little bit unlucky. They went 1-0 up on the road in Belgium, ended up with a 1-1 draw. LOSC are not doing particularly well in the Austrian league. 1-4, drawn 3, lost 2. I hate to use that must-win phrase, but I think it's one of those games you just have to win at home. There's a battle between the three other teams. Liverpool are going to go through. A good start for Toulouse, but they're going to need to win against LOSC on Thursday. I think they've got even without much European experience, I think they've got a really good chance of winning that and putting them in a good position ahead of the doubleheader against Liverpool.
There's one more team, Baptiste, involved in European competition. It's Lille, and I'm not going to ask you to pronounce who they're playing, which I was tempted to do, but I have since seen that everyone just calls them Ki. So we'll just go with that. Lille versus Ki, who lost their opening game to Slovan Bratislava. Olimpia Slovenia, the other team in this group that Lille beat 2-0 in the first game. I mean, it's a group that Lille should be winning every day of the week, isn't it?
On paper, yes, but Lille struggled against Rijeka in the qualifying stages, and this Key side was the success story of the summer when they just for making it to this tournament, but also in the wins they gathered along the way. I think they beat Molde, they beat Ferencváros, so not necessarily the biggest sides in the world either, but recognizable names on the continent of teams you wouldn't want to go away to. So, yes, on the Ferries team, I think they're semi-professionals or they've only just become professionals, but they're certainly on a good run, and they gave Bratislava a good game in their opening game. So I think Lille should learn from its mistakes of the past against Rijeka and really not take it for granted, but certainly on paper, even with the limited depth that Lille do have at the club, that there should be too good for Key.
Okay, well, now it's time for the world's most difficult and amazing French football quiz, in English, that is, Déjà Who. Before we reveal the question for the next month and your chance to win a Terem Moffi jersey, we have a September jersey to give away, and it's none other than a Paris Saint-Germain jersey of Marco Asensio. So before we announce the lucky winner of that prize, here are the answers that you had to get right in September. First up, I won't read out the question, but the answer was Jorge Burruchaga, the Argentinian forward who scored the winning goal against West Germany at the World Cup in Mexico in 1986. He played for Nantes for 7 years, and his last ever match in France was actually with Valenciennes. And it was, I asked why was it such an important match and his last ever match? Well, it was, of course, the match where he was very seriously and heavily involved in the match-fixing scandal, which ended up costing Marseille their place in the top flight, the 1993 Ligue 1 title as well. They actually played Valenciennes 3 days before the final of the Champions League. They were hoping to have the Ligue 1 title all wrapped up so that they could go and play in the Champions League final, which is exactly what they did. It was a 1-0 victory. There are amazing footage of the game at halftime between Marseille and Valenciennes, where you can see that this whole incredibly controversial story is coming out, and the referees are aware of what's being said, and there are officials from Valenciennes there and players talking, and you have Didier Deschamps, who's there, the captain of Marseille, talking to the referees about what's being said and that the game may be fixed. The fix is in on the game, and it's remarkable. Go and check it out. Crazy footage from way back when. One of the amazing stories of French football. We'll get Andreas to look into that one day, perhaps as well in the history segment. The second answer was Yohan Cabaye, and we've spoken a lot about Lille that won the league in 2011. Yohan Cabaye was another member of that squad. He was a youngster whose dad came through the ranks at Lens. He came through the ranks at Lille before going on to play for Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Saint-Etienne. He hung up the boots just 2 years ago after one final go at Saint-Etienne. I seem to remember he scored against PSG in the game as well against Paris Saint-Germain. He's now technical coach at the Paris Saint-Germain Youth Academy. He was, I think, academy director for a little while, and now he's in one of the secondary directing roles there. First of all, congratulations for the Burruchaga and Yohan Cabaye answers of the month of September go to Simon Klopfenstein, who has won that Marco Asensio jersey. So congratulations, Simon. Get in touch on league1podcast@gmail.com and we will send that jersey out to you. So now, for this week's question, you have to send your answers, if you think you know who it is, to league1podcast@gmail.com to go into the running to win an OGC Nice jersey with Terem Moffi's name on the back. Get your thinking caps on and listen closely. Who am I? I made my debut for my hometown club at just 14 years of age, moving overseas at 16. At 17, I won the Golden Boot as top scorer and lifted the cup. After another international move and a World Cup in between, I finally arrived in France at the ripe old age of 20. I burst onto the scene in Ligue 1 with my first of 4 French clubs, starring in, but not winning, the Champions League in my first season. I scored against Bayern Munich and AC Milan. After another 16 years of my career in Europe and beyond, I won the Ligue 1 title and the English FA Cup, before finally hanging up my boots after one last stint in the French 4th Division, or National 2. Who am I, and where am I now? So, if you have it, or you think you might have it, send your answers in to league1podcast@gmail.com and you can go into the running for the OGC Nice Terem Moffi jersey. Okay, gentlemen, we are almost done on this latest episode of Le Beau Jeu, the official Ligue 1 podcast. Time to look ahead to round 8 of what's coming up. There are some big matches, obviously. We've chatted already about the Derby du Nord, where I will, at the end of this little segment, be asking for a winner of that one. But there are some other big matches coming up. Friday night, Strasbourg versus Nantes. Should be a great atmosphere there. On Saturday, Metz versus Nice. Metz need to arrest the slide under Laszlo Bologna, and Nice are looking to defend their undefeated record. Saturday night, Reims versus Monaco. On Sunday, early kickoff or late Saturday night kickoff, Sunday night kickoff if you're here in Australia. Olympique Marseille versus Le Havre. Brest take on Toulouse. Lyon against Lorient. Montpellier versus Clermont. The Derby du Nord is the 5 o'clock game on Sunday. And then the final match of the round has Stade Rennais versus Paris Saint-Germain. JJ, some big games coming up. What's tickling your fancy in round 8?
You know what? I'm a bit split. Obviously, I think PSG at Rennes will jump out to a lot of people. But you've also got the Balogun derby between Reims and Monaco. So that one could be interesting as well. But it's difficult to see past Rennes versus PSG. You know, generally one of the sort of heavyweight clashes in Ligue 1. And to be honest, I had that one down as the one that PSG would struggle in this run of away games instead of Clermont. But like I was saying earlier, PSG generally tend to deliver their better performances against the bigger sides. So who knows? Perhaps we'll see them, finally get a positive result against a team that's become something of, a bogey side for them in recent years, because Rennes, have shown them up, a number of times in the league over the last couple of years. And traditionally, since the beginning of the QSI era, in fact, I think have been PSG's toughest domestic opponents.
Rennes are a bogey side. Maybe they don't like dominant forces. They were always Olympique Lyonnais bogey side in that run of Lyon between 2002 and 2008. If anyone was going to beat them, it was going to be Rennes back then as well. Baptiste, what catches your eye in round 8?
I mean, all the ones that Jonathan has mentioned, obviously, Rennes, PSG, it's always a tantalizing look at whether Rennes could, push on and be a real challenger to the top 3. So I'm always intrigued by that, and they played really well last season. But I'm a slight glutton for punishment, and Lyon versus Lorient, I think, has just a lot of intriguing aspects to it. Because I think, obviously, we've talked about Lyon, but Lorient have been a bit hit and miss this season in Lebris's second season. And he's been given a lot of power, so he's there's a potential for it to be similar to Julien Stéphan's second season at Strasbourg, which I'm hoping not, because I'm very impressed by Lebris. But it's going to be quite tense because both sides are a little bit, are not at the happiest of times at the moment. And as Jonathan says in the chat, it's the return of Romain Fèvre, who seems to enjoy Brittany, but not Lyon, so I'm sure he'll be out to impress.
The terrible Julien Stéphan second season syndrome, which has just been captured there. What was his second season at Rennes like? Was it second or third season syndrome at Rennes?
His second full season.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he came in midway through a season.
Yeah,
I think.
That's right. Yeah, Andreas, what do you think's going to happen, and what tickles your fancy?
I agree with Baptiste. After all we've talking about with Lyon, I mean, what formation are they going to play? Because Grosso's pick had 2 completely different formations in the 2 matches that I've seen. So, sooner or later, probably sooner, he's going to have to decide where he wants to go through there. And I think Lyon need their big players like Tagliafico and these guys to really kind of stand up to the plate, because against Reims, they lacked a bit of fight for me. So I'm really interested to see how Lyon do. And Reims Monaco, because, 2 teams doing really well. And I think Will still took over after Reims lost against Monaco last year. I seem to remember a really unfair red card for a Reims player. I can't remember who it was. But Oscar Garcia got fired right after that. So I think Will still is in his job, not because of that match, but that was the kind of catalyst, wasn't it? When Monaco went and beat Reims 3-0 last year. And it was, what's it the French would say, un bien pour un mal. They fired their coach and they ended up with Will Still. So that'll be that could be a really interesting and entertaining one as well. 2 teams playing some good football.
We've already heard the big preview for Lens versus Lille, but just very quickly, gentlemen, Andreas, sticking with you, in a word, Lens versus Lille, who wins?
I'll go for Lille. I think Lens might be a bit exhausted after their European adventures. Though Lille have got a long trip as well, but it might just take a bit less out of them emotionally than a Champions League match. So close, but I'll just about go for Lille.
Baptiste?
I'm going to go for Lens. I think they're on a good positive dynamic, and intrigued to see Eli Wahi push on as well. And he's a real talent in that derby.
It was a fantastic goal he scored on the weekend. His first for Lens, the cut back onto the left foot and rifling it into the bottom corner from the edge of the box. Not to put ideas in your head, JJ, but what do you think is going to happen in the Derby du Nord?
As much as I'm tempted to join Baptiste in calling a Lens victory, I actually think I'm going to go between Baptiste and Andreas, and I'm going to go for a draw. I would love to think that Lens get through the week unbeaten, so fingers crossed for them in the Champions League game against Arsenal. But I think that trip's going to take the trip to the Faroe Islands is going to take a lot out of Lille. So yeah, I'm going to say draw is a good shout. Wouldn't be stunned if Lens won it though.
All right, fantastic, gentlemen. You are listening to Jonathan Johnson, Baptiste Reynaud, Andreas Evagora, and myself, Robbie Thomson, on Le Beau Jeu. We will be back in 2 weeks' time. We will be back in the middle of the international break because there's only one round coming up of Ligue 1 football before it's Les Bleus, who take centre stage yet again, looking to qualify for Euro 2024. They take on the Netherlands, and then they have a friendly against Scotland as well, another chance perhaps for the Paris Saint-Germain front three, or at least what many people envisage being the front three for Les Bleus in years to come, to strut their stuff. But we'll have to wait and see how that goes. We don't have any more time, unfortunately. It's another monster episode of Le Beau Jeu. Don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter, or X as it's known, at Ligue1_ENG. Find us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Like and subscribe. Tell your mates all about it. It's the one place you can hear the experts talking about league and football. And of course, then we will be back in 2 weeks' time with a full preview of the Olympico. What a match that could be for all the wrong reasons coming up in a couple of weeks' time. Marseille versus Lyon. I can't even imagine how full-on and dangerous that could be for one of those two sides, particularly Olympique Lyonnais at the moment, who could be rock bottom of the league after 8 games. JJ, thank you for joining us. Baptiste as well. Andreas, a pleasure as always. Thank you at home for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time for the next episode of Le Beau Jeu. Bye-bye.